this border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
5 receivers at Duncan's disposal. Duncan stepping up. Hit! Ball is loose!
Big call here.
Marshall thinks they have it. And the Horde do!
Here's the kickoff from Amaretto Curry to the Hilltoppers, and we are underway. And a fake reverse on the kick return. And here comes Townsend down the left sideline. What a way to start it for Western Kentucky on the road. And it is an opening touchdown return. And just like that, the Hilltoppers strike first.
Justin Rohrwasser to try to win it for Marshall from 53 yards out. It's got the leg. It is good! And the perfect season continues for Justin Rohrwasser.
Goes for 2. Going for the win. Western Kentucky going for the victory. Rolling to his right. Quick strike. And they did it! Western Kentucky has ended the perfect season into the hands of Willie McNeil. A shocker here in West Virginia. And it is over for Marshall. They end the regular season 11-1.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Finally, Moonshine Throwdown week is upon us, which is really, really awesome and kind of terrible because that means it's the end of the season. But it's awesome because everything is literally on the line in this game. It's not just for bragging rights. It's not just for, crap talk and all that kind of stuff on the Twitterverse. This game means more than it normally does this year. This one is for all the marbles. Winner goes to the Conference USA title game. Runner-up sticks around to see what bowl they get. I mean, the loser of this game, not necessarily the runner-up, but you know what I mean. We've had epic games from 2014 on. Some have been great. Some have been rather lopsided. Talking about 2016, where the Tops just boat raced the Herd at home to end a rather abysmal season for Marshall. But all the other games have really, really been classics. I mean, for one reason or another, they've been classics. Whether it's been certain players that have had a great game, certain plays that just stick out in your head were made in that game, or the stakes that were on the line. But this one, I believe, Steve, is the first time that we've had a really almost mirror image team of one another as far as how good they are overall with the East on the line. We've had the East on the line before. Winner goes to the title game, loser doesn't. 2015, but that was two totally different teams. Western Kentucky was just amazingly good. Marshall was really good too. They were just not at that level of the 2015 Topper team. But this is the one that I believe they've been the most evenly matched this late in the season with all the marbles on the game. If you look at the power index, it's basically a coin flip. Call it what it is. Marshall's getting a little bit of a home edge in the coin flip. 56.7% chance to win for the Herd, which means 43.3 for the Tops. But let's face it, that's a coin flip. Depending on what line you're looking at, this is a toss-up game by as little as half a point. I've seen Marshall minus half a point. I've seen Marshall as much as 1.5. What I haven't seen is Western favored, which is some would think is kind of crazy because Western's the one on the 6-game winning streak. Marshall's the one that's still a little bit of struggling to find its identity and be consistent offensively, week in and week out. That's exactly what Western is. They're the epitome of offensive consistency, and their defense has just been through the roof over the last 5 or 6 weeks. So, Vegas is smart. We know that. So for them to think this is a 1-point pick'em type game, they must be into something that we're not 100% on. We know Marshall's really good. We're not trying to slight them, But if you're an innocent bystander just looking at this game, you're probably thinking, man, Western's going to come in and do what they do. They're going to put up 40, 50 points, and will Marshall be able to keep pace? You wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to think that. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something a little bit different in this episode. We're going to ditch all of the players to look out for. If you pay attention to the Twitter account, if you pay attention to our previous podcast, who the players are on both of these teams. There's no need for us to give you their measurables, their season stats. I'm sure Steven's got some things in his holster there that he's going to fire out as data points to drive home the point of some of these talking points. But by and large, who these people are. So we don't have to talk about it. What we're going to do is we're going to go position by position. And we did this in the preseason where we talked about who has the edge at a certain position group. Well, now we're at the end of the season and things have shaken out the way they have. And we're going to do that again. And we're going to talk about who's got the edge at every position, or at least every position group. And we'll just see how we think this shakes out. So I've got Steven with me. We're going to talk a little bit more heavy Western Kentucky on this half of the episode. And after the break, Trace is going to come in and join me, and we're going to do the same thing with a little bit more herd heavy flavor. So Steve, it's Moonshine Throwdown week. Before we get into the game, before we get into your thoughts, first things first, you're making the trip and you're coming up Friday. He's going to be looking for some pals in Kelly Green to welcome a man in red who enjoys a nice Crown and Coke into Huntington, West Virginia for, some pregame, some fun times, some good times. So talk about making the trip, how, it's kind of been a long time coming. You've been talking about it for a while. At least you and I have been talking about you potentially making the trip for a long time. The rest of the Twitterverse might think it's not so, planned out, but you've been talking about it for a while. So look, it's Moonshine Throwdown week. It's what we revolve around. It's what it's all about for us. So talk about, you being able to make the trip and not being rushed home, not coming up, watching the game and going home. You're going to have a little bit of time to experience Huntington, make some new friends, maybe a few enemies too.
Yeah. It has been a long time coming, but it's always one of those things that, I want to come, I'm planning on coming, but, I kind of have to have all my stars aligned just right. And luckily everything did shape out right with work, wife and kids, even with the holiday right here, it still worked out to where I'm going to make the trip. We're going to leave Friday afternoon and be there by probably 8:00 local time. So plenty of time to get checked into our hotel and then get down towards the Union type area and see kind of just where we land. That we'll probably end up at Union. I've had a couple other places recommended to me. And then I've had several people reach out over the following, the recent weeks as far as, hey, come to our tailgate. And, all those people know who they are if you're listening on Twitter or on the podcast. We've talked and DM'd, and it's going to be a busy Friday evening and Saturday morning. And I hope my wife's ready to get dragged around a little bit and meet some awesome people that have always been welcoming, every time I've been in town, the few times, and even earlier this season coming in town, on a non-Western week. So it's going to be fun. Before kickoff, we're going to be friendly, enjoy a few drinks. And then once that ball's kicked, we'll be rivals on the field for a few hours and hopefully have a great game. Everything is shaping up to be one of those epic type clashes. And just going down my quick notes, it can go a lot of ways in several of these position groups. So it's going to be interesting to talk about those. Obviously I'm going to lean the red way, but I do have plenty of respect and, just insight to know that, this game's not going to be a rollover gimme game. And I'm just excited for, the whole trip, the atmosphere, getting to meet people, just everything that's going to build up to kind of what we will revolve around and what we've built up here. So it's going to be a fun one for sure.
It's kind of wild to think that when you have a weekend stack up the way this one is shaping up, with all the people that have reached out to you and all the invites at various places and tailgates and bars and this, that, and the other that you've experienced over the past week or so, that it almost the game takes a little bit of a back seat to what else is going on for you. And that's just kind of the magic of the Moonshine Throwdown, to be honest with you, because I experience that a lot. Every time I go to Bowling Green, it's a lot about, meeting folks and revisiting with old friends again and making new friends, to the point that the game is finally the time to sit back and take a breath and chill for 3 hours and have a good time in a different fashion. But I envy you. I think you're going to have a great time. Also, every time I'm in Huntington for a Moonshine Throwdown, it does not disappoint. I mean, I know you've been there before, but this is going to be a new wrinkle for you, so to speak. You're more of a popular, well-known entity now. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and 5 years ago, or whenever it was totally different. I mean, hell, the first time I met you in person was at that 2016 game, the 60-6 beatdown in it was freezing cold. And it was abysmal unless you were wearing red and white, because it was pretty awesome. You could have kept on. You would have sat through that all night. But let's talk about this one, though. This is the one. Do you recall this being, like everything being at stake to this level, with the teams being as evenly matched as they have? Everybody's kind of either been kind of up there and somebody was a little bit higher, or somebody was down and somebody was up, or vice versa. But no matter what, they've always been fairly close, outside of the 2015 game and 2016 game, where like the two largest margins of victory. Everything else has been really close. I think last year, what was it, like 14 or 24 points, maybe something like that, was a little bit of an outlier as well. But the meat and potatoes in the middle, they were really close. It was a 3-point game, last second win. And then 75-week game, I believe, was still only like a 6 or 7 point game. So this one, I called it the culmination a couple of days ago on Twitter. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like that is the most accurate term that I could place on this game pre-game. We might be calling it something different at the end, but right now this is the culmination. Thoughts on this Moonshine Throwdown 2021? Wow.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's two really good, capable offenses. I mean, I think Western's been pretty consistent offensively all year as far as what they're going to do, points they're going to put up. Marshall's kind of the same way. They've been very consistent, high octane, putting up a lot of points and yards, but they do it kind of more passing and rushing, whereas Western is really pass heavy. And then defensively, Marshall's always strong. They're always very strong on their front, on the back end, linebackers, everything. And Western kind of this year started out inconsistent, but now that's turned into a strength, to where, like you've said, this is just kind of a culmination and almost a perfect storm of two teams colliding that, we kind of foreshadowed this weeks ago, as the records were shaping up and the matchups and the FAU game and just all these things had to come into play and kind of line out perfectly, that, this game could very well come down to determine who is going to have the shot at the title game, unless one of us tripped up, along the way. But all those circumstances have played out just right. Two really strong teams are going to be on the field. And it's going to be strength on strength in a lot of cases here. And obviously something's going to have to give. This game's not going to end in a tie. So it's going to be really fun, and definitely one of the most anticipated matchups in this rivalry in quite a long time. And I think the game could go either way. Obviously, I'll speak into the positions which way I'm going to think the edge is going to lie for both ways, and I'm not just all red. I'm not chalk one way. I try to be realistic when I put on my fan hat and my podcasting hat. But I think it's gonna be a really, really, really good game, and hopefully at the end of the day, Saturday around 5:30, 6 o'clock, it favors the red team, if you're from my point of view.
It's not just your point of view. There's a lot of people's point of view that share that same sentiment. They want to see, I guess you could finger quotes and say an upset, because Marshall is technically favored and they are, ahead by a small margin in the power index. But I don't really think it's fair to call anybody a favorite in this game. It's just, it's all week long. We've been talking rivalry, and we use those terms and we say those things. And every year when we do the podcast about the Moonshine Throwdown, we always say the same thing. And that is, when it's a rivalry, you throw it all out the window. And that's the first time I've said that this whole week. And it happened to be here on the podcast. You truly do have to throw it out the window, because you don't know what's going to happen. There is a little bit of extra juice. There's a little bit of, extra motivation. I mean, the Conference USA East is on the line. What more motivation do you need? And then to throw the guys that you particularly dislike across the field from you, I mean, what more do you want? What more could you want? So it's senior day in Huntington as well. We just experienced Western Kentucky beat the mortal piss out of Florida Atlantic on their senior day. And now the Herd gets Western for its senior day. So if you're a Herd fan, if you're within an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however far away, and you can make it to the game, you didn't make it to the game. I mean, what more could you ask for? Conference title berth is on the line. Senior day, rival game. What do you want? Final home game at the Joan. If you make it to the Conference USA Championship game, there's not a scenario that it gets played in Huntington. So you're going to San Antonio. No matter who wins this game, they're going to San Antonio. What more do you want? This honestly, you can look at this as a de facto conference championship game, because these are two of the premier teams in the entire conference, right? I think you got a four-headed monster this year. It's UTSA, UAB, Marshall, and Western Kentucky. That's it. That's your cream of the crop this year. So this is a de facto conference championship game too. You're going to have to win a championship 2 weeks in a row to rise out of this bad boy. This is a great all around matchup. I don't know what would keep you from going. I mean, hell, you're making the trip. I hope several hundred others at least make the trip. This is a big one. So let's talk about who might have the edge, Steve. Let's go down these position groups. Let's kind of talk through it. Let's see what you can convince me of. Let's put it that way. Let's see what you can teach me that I don't already know that might change my mind about the way I feel about certain things. So let's start where it all starts, right? Quarterback, most important position on the field, singular position on the field. He touches the ball every play. It all runs behind the quarterback. So who's got the edge at quarterback? Might be, in your eyes, the biggest slam dunk of the day, but who's got the edge at quarterback in the Moonshine Throwdown?
Well, I mean, I'm going to lean Bailey Zappi, but I'm going to say that with the caveat of, I know Grant Wells can sling the ball. I mean, when you look at the weekly stats and just the numbers that Wells is putting up, he's not terribly far behind Bailey Zappi as far as yards per game. And I've talked to other people who say, well, Wells doesn't have to throw the ball as much as Zappi because he has Rasheen Ali, who is near the lead in rushing touchdowns in the nation, if not the leader, and has been for a lot of the season. Yeah. So, and then as I got to thinking about that, I said, well, my way of looking at that and thinking of that is, I think Wells is really good at throwing the ball between the 20 and the 20, or the 10 and the 10, however you want to look at it. He gets the ball across the big chunk of the field throwing the ball. But when you get down close to the goal line, I think we all know that those windows start to shrink. Those coverages get a little tighter. And I think we know that Wells, when put in positions with pressure or tighter coverage, has made some mistakes. He also leads the nation in interceptions, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think it's a good thing for him to have a running back that he can hand the ball off to when you get down close and let him take it into the end zone. You kind of get that margin of error out of the way when you can hand it off to a guy with that talent. So quarterback-wise, I will lead Bailey Zappi, but I do know that both of these guys can really throw the ball, and there's probably going to be a lot of yards and a lot of points put up. I just think Bailey Zappi is less prone to making mistakes. I think he'll make better decisions. I think he's better in his system than what Grant Wells is in his system, even though he's very good at his system and will put up good stats. We've also seen him put up less than desirable stats at times. So that's why I'm going to leave Bailey Zappi, Death Taxes Conference USA Player of the Week.
Look, I can appreciate how you're being diplomatic to start this thing off, but let's face it. When you're the number one quarterback in passing yards, passing touchdowns, passing yards per game, I mean, there's like half a dozen categories that he's number one in the nation. Not number one in Conference USA, but in the freaking nation. You have to give the edge to Bailey Zappi. You have to. You have to. When you're also talking about a guy who could be just one of a handful of quarterbacks potentially to reach that 5,000 yard and 50 touchdown milestone in a season, you have to give the edge to Bailey Zappi. Now, you're right. This is no slight to Grant Wells. This guy could start for 2/3, 3/4, 80%, 85% of teams in America. I mean, he's good. He ranks in the top 10, 15 in a lot of the major quarterbacking categories. He's a great quarterback, but you're right. His touchdown to interception ratio is a little bit less than what you'd like to see. Whereas Zappi's is really what you love to see. You know, what is he, like 48-9 or something like that? I mean, that might not be exact, but it's pretty damn close. Whereas Wells is like 11-12 or 12-12. You know, it's you're right. He does a great job of getting them between the 20s, getting them and racking up yards and making the big plays. But consistency is the key for a quarterback. We all know that. And Bailey Zappi is far more consistent in making his throws game in and game out than Grant Wells is for one reason or another, whether it's just, you know, nerves or adrenaline rush or whatever. But once Wells settles down, he becomes a completely different quarterback. And I'm not sure that they can afford to have an off first quarter against a team like Western Kentucky who can come out and score 28 in the quarter. I don't think you can do that. So he's going to have his best game potentially as a Herd quarterback on Saturday in order for this to go the way the Herd wants it to go. So yes, slight edge. Well, not even a slight edge. Considerable edge Bailey Zappi in this game, but Grant Wells could still come out and light it up. Zappi, he has yet to come out and have the no touchdown, 4 interception game. I mean, it might not be in his DNA to do that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that it could happen, right? Because it can happen to any quarterback. So if Zappi has a below Zappi type day and Wells has the game that he's capable of having, hey, anything can happen. It's a rivalry game. But edge right now, Bailey Zappi. Running back. Who's got the edge at running back? Both individually or as a unit, whatever you want to call it. Who's got the edge at this position group?
Well, I think kind of the same thing that we said about quarterback here. You just have to respect when somebody is leading, statistical categories on a national level. And I think everyone involved in this rivalry and podcast should know that Rasheen Ali has just been a workhorse quarterback for Marshall, near leading the nation, if not leading the nation in rushing touchdowns, whereas Western has been running back by committee. And while we will hand the ball off, it's not something. It's almost something that Western is going to do to keep you honest, not to try to ground and pound you and grind a game out. That's not what we've tried to do. Even when we've had big leads, we're still out there throwing the ball. In general, we will rush the ball a little bit more heavy, but generally we're still pitching the ball around even when we're up several touchdowns. So I think. While I do think the Western game is underrated as far as the talent they have and how much they could utilize them, I think the Marshall running game is more effective. I think Marshall has a very good offensive line. And obviously Ali has proven to be a very good running back. So I'll give the edge to Marshall in this round, just statistically and what they've done, the body of work this year. It's hard to look the other way, even from a biased perspective. You just have to keep it real and say, Marshall has a really good running back, and it is what it
it's
is.
the same thing. If you're leading the nation, not the conference, but the nation in several categories at your position, you got the edge. Rashid Ali leading the country in rushing touchdowns and total touchdowns, not by a quarterback, obviously, but that's got to give you the edge. He's 1,000-yard back, already. So anything on that is just gravy. He's already eclipsed the 1,000-yard mark. Yeah, Western Kentucky has a stable of very good backs. They just don't need to use them as in the way that Marshall has to utilize their backs. It's not the same offense. Marshall doesn't run an air raid offense. Just looking at the quick stats between Wells and Zappe, we're not going back to that, but Zappe has like 130 more pass attempts than Wells does. So that tells you right there, that's 130 some fewer carries potentially that a running back's going to get, right? So their offenses are just different. They're still very high octane. Both of them like to use tempo. They like to get in a rhythm, and it's predicated on that. But when you are leading the country, you have the edge. Rasheen Bad Intentions Ali, which is I love that nickname. That's great. That's Mitch Big Game Tinsley to me. It's Rasheen Bad Intentions Ali because that's exactly what he runs with. Bad intentions. He's looking for the end zone on every freaking play. Oh, and by the way, when he gets tired, Sheldon Evans can come in and still get you 4 or 5 yards of carry until Ali's ready to come back in the game. And Marshall has actually faced some adversity at the running back position this year. There was a guy that is no longer on the roster who had a ton of talent. So, they had to kind of regroup a little bit, but that just put a little bit more of the spotlight on Ali, and he rose to the occasion. I mean, he is one of the finest backs to come through Marshall in a long time. And that's not taking anything away from Brendan Knox. He was a great running back, but NFL wise, this kid's a freshman and he's already drawing a lot of NFL comparisons. So you got to give the edge to Western or to Marshall, even though Western, I think they do run, you're right. They run a little bit more than people probably think they do. And they're effective when they do it. If it's 3rd and 2, they can get you 4 yards. They can get you 5 yards. Hell, they'll bust loose for 8 or 9 on occasion. They'll keep you honest, but they just don't have to utilize those guys as well. So, yeah, slight edge, running backs, Marshall. Wide receiver time. I mean, I know this is one you're going to love to talk about. So who's got the edge at wide receiver?
Yeah, I think both teams have very good and capable wide receivers. I just don't think any team in Conference USA is as deep as Western is at wide receiver. I mean, I've seen stats for conference leaders. I think Western has like two of the top 3 or 4, and like 3 of the top 6, 4 of the top 10 wide receivers by yards and touchdowns in the conference. So they have almost got half of the top conference receivers on their roster. I mean, we're very deep. Our offense, again, is predicated on wide receivers catching the ball, making plays. And they've just been nothing but productive all year, whether it's Stearns, whether it's Tinsley, whether it's Davis. I mean, we're spreading the ball around to a lot of different people who are going to have a lot of yards, a lot of average yards per catch, a lot of different guys catching touchdowns. You can't just focus in on any 1 or 2 different guys because Zappe's going to spread the ball around. It could be somebody new burning you every week. We've seen it be really Stearns heavy. We've seen it be Tinsley heavy. We've seen David Davis have a couple good games. So, no slight to anyone on the Marshall, the Kelly Green side. It's just there's not many teams in the nation, in my opinion, that have a deeper stable of wide receivers that can hurt you than Western Kentucky does. And I just think they all are very comfortable in the system at this point. 12 games into the season, they know what they're doing, where to be. And we've seen very good hands pretty much across the board, and a lot of big plays. Just so many big plays And it all starts with the quarterback, the gunslinger, who's pulling the trigger. But the guys on the other end have to catch the ball, make the plays, and man, they have been phenomenal this year. So it should be fun. It's, in my opinion, it's definitely the WKU group though that has the advantage.
Yeah, this to me is where the biggest edge goes, one way or the other, in all these position groups. It's wide receivers for Western Kentucky, and it's nothing against what Marshall's bringing to the table, but these guys from Bowling Green are just special. For context, leading receiver for the Herd is Corey Gamage, and the dude is a specimen. He would be a number one wide receiver on a lot of teams in the conference. But he's got 62 catches on the season. That leads the Herd. That would be tied for second with on Western Kentucky's team, but he would be tied with Mitch Tinsley and Malachi Corley. Both of those guys have 62 yards. Jarrett Stearns, I mean, what in the world is going on here? This guy just seemingly comes out of nowhere. Now, he was highly productive at Houston Baptist, but who really in Conference USA circles is following Houston Baptist? Not too many people. And so you're thinking, all right, where's this guy come from? And he comes out and he catches, to date, 123 catches on the season, obliterating Western Kentucky's single season receptions record and counting, by the way. Over 1,500 yards receiving. Mitch Tinsley over 1,000 yards receiving. I mean, come on. How do these guys not have a huge edge? You got 2,000-yard receivers, and one of them's a 1,500-yard receiver. And, the leading receiver for the Herd is Corey Gamage with 62 catches, 784 yards, which is great. But it ain't 1,500 yards. It ain't 1,000 and some yards. So nothing against him. These guys are just doing it better. Marshall's faced some a little bit of behind the eight ball in the receiving game because one of their biggest playmakers, Talik Keaton, was injured for a big chunk of the season, but he's back now. So we'll see how big of a factor he is in this game. You hope, if you're a Herd fan, he's a huge factor. But right now, based on what's on paper, what we've seen happen on the field all year long, and what it all adds up to now, man, it's edge Western Kentucky. What you need to be worried about if you're a Herd fan is, can Marshall's third and fourth corner or DB cover guys like Dawood Davis and Malachi Corley consistently, because they're studs. They're overshadowed quite a bit by Tinsley and Stearns, who are also studs. So that's a scary thought. Can your number 4, number 5 corner or DB hang with Dawood Davis, hang with, Malachi Corley? Oh, and can your number 1 corner hang with Jarrett Stearns all day? A whole nother problem. So this is a big discrepancy for me. Edge Western Kentucky, no more discussion. Tight ends. Who's got the edge of tight end?
Yeah, I wrote Marshall, and then I wrote push ? Beside it, because I really think this could come down to how the teams utilize them in this game. I think everyone knows that Xavier Gaines is really good on the Marshall side. And everyone should know that Joshua Simon's been down since the Army game for Western, but they also have had Joey Beljan step up and be really productive, 2 touchdowns last week. He can, when the ball's thrown his way, he can catch it and can make plays. But I really think a lot of this is going to boil down to how well they're utilized. I did put Marshall, and then I also put push ? Because we just don't know how they're going to utilize in this game, how heavy they're going to look the direction of the tight end, which for Western isn't a lot. And for Marshall, I still don't, when I listen to you all's recaps of the games, I don't think it's a lot to Xavier Gaines. I think it could and should be more. But because of just his overall talent and his diversity, I would probably give that edge to Marshall, because I think he's a bigger talent and a bigger threat than Joey Beljan is. And if Joshua Simon's here, maybe it's a different conversation today. But I think the tight end position is going to be a lean to the Marshall side. But with Beljan, being respectable in his own right and kind of in fill-in duties, I think, but Marshall does get the edge here for me.
Yeah, I think Marshall has to get the edge here. Joey Belgian is an intriguing entity. I mean, 9 catches on the season, 5 of those have gone for touchdown. What? But when we bang the drum about Xavier Gaines all the time. And I tweeted from my personal account last week that he is a downfield threat because they kept running this little 4-yard, 5-yard crossing pattern and throw it to him, and he'd end up getting shoved out of bounds, for a 5-yard gain or whatever. And I'm like, man, what are we doing here? What is this? What is going on? Why is Gaines continually being utilized as a 5-yard tight end crossing route receiver when he's so much more? And then lo and behold, later in the game, he skirts right down the seam and he ends up with a long touchdown. I'll be damned. He's a downfield threat. He's a mismatch. You got to utilize that mismatch. But also, conversely, Joshua Simon's gone down. It's Belgian and Simon were the only 2 guys on the roster with a catch from the tight end position. Now it's just Belgian. So where Marshall starts to gain separation is with their other tight ends. Devin Miller, who returned last week. He had a horrible elbow injury against, I think, North Texas, but he returned last week. So he's back on the field and able to contribute in whatever capacity they need him to contribute, whether it's blocking or receiving. And then you throw in a guy like Garrett Morrell, the former quarterback, who was the starting quarterback in that 2016 Moonshine Throwdown, by the way. Nice piece of trivia for you. He's now a converted tight end, and he may only get 4 or 5 catches on the year, but they seem to go for like 25 yards, and he's a very good blocking tight end. So, when you start to factor in that Marshall's run game is really strong, and you have guys like Garrett Morrell that can come in and provide an extra really big bulldozing blocker, you got to give the edge at tight ends to Marshall. But I love the point you made about how will they be utilized. Will we continue to see Xavier Gaines on a 5-yard crossing pattern? Or will they try to utilize him to get a linebacker in coverage or something to that effect? If that's what happens, Tim Cramsey will finally get a round of resounding applause from a lot of Herd Nation for finally using Xavier Gaines to the fullest extent of the weapon that he is. But edge, Marshall, and tight ends for me. Offensive line, this is a great one. If you remember back in the preseason, we talked about these units potentially being the number 1 and number 2 units in the conference. We had some question marks for Western Kentucky because of what was lost right in the middle, and how would they replace those pieces and who would rise to the occasion, and would they be able to get the right 5 that work for them? And by God, they have. Number 1 PFF ranking in pass blocking. They do an okay job, I guess, if you want to call it that, in run support. They don't have to do a whole lot. Their bread and butter is pass blocking. So who's got the line, or who's got the edge at offensive line?
Yeah, I think this one's kind of 2 sides of the coin. I think, I think if we were grading it out more compartmentalized, I think if we were saying who's the better run blocking O-line, I think you'd say Marshall. I think if you said who's the better pass blocking offensive line, I think you'd say Western. But I'm going to have to lean towards which one does what they do better. And, Western has given up the fewest amount of sacks in Conference USA. Western has the number 1 graded pass protecting unit, according to PFF. So I think both offensive lines are really good. Like you just mentioned, the preseason talk about it was, Marshall's always really good in this position group. Always is really strong, stout. Seems like they've always got guys that have been there for 6 years. And they just reload and refresh, and it's always a really strong unit. Western, we talked about losing 3 guys last year. This year having question marks, but they reloaded some of those positions with some transfers. Luckily, they're bookended by a couple strong players at tackles. But they've turned in and they've gelled as a really good unit, a really, a new position coach there. And they've been the number 1 rated pass protected unit in the nation and in the conference by far. So, my edge goes Western Kentucky. I think what we're going to do is pass the ball a lot. And they are protecting Zappy and keeping him very clean. And if that's what they do, this is going to be one of those strength on strength matchups, though, because the defensive line for Marshall that we're about to talk about, I'm sure, is also really strong and gets to the quarterback, causes a lot of disruption. I saw a graphic today that Charles Huff had tweeted out, kind of outlining some of these stats and where Marshall ranks. So, and as soon as I saw it, I saw strength on strength. Something has to give there. But I'm going to lean on, the system and the players. I think we're going to be put in a better position to be successful with the system. It's going to be hard for a defensive line to apply pressure to a quarterback who's getting the ball out before you can get that pressure there. It's kind of going to be my takeaway and why I think I'm going to lean Western Kentucky for this group.
I can't tell you you're wrong, but what I can tell you before we, I can't, and I also can't say that this is all on the defensive line. I have to speak about this data point by the defense as a whole for Marshall. They're number one in the country in sacks. That's not by mistake, right? They do a really good job of getting to the quarterback. So you're right. It is strength on strength when you talk about this offensive line versus facing this entire defense of Marshall. They do a great job, better than anybody in the country, at getting to the quarterback. Whereas Western Kentucky's offensive line does a better job than anybody of keeping people off their quarterback. Here's where it gets a little bit, nitpicky for me. And this is where I give the edge to Marshall, because they open gaping running lanes week in and week out for their running backs. And they can make an average running back look good, a good running back look great, and a great running back look elite. So when you have an elite running back like Rasheen Ali, he just looks even better. Oh, by the way, they do another phenomenal job of keeping their own quarterback clean. So Grant Wells doesn't get sacked a whole lot either. So we can talk about, the inability of each defense to get to the opposing quarterback. But when you also throw into the fact that Marshall's so predicated on running the ball really well, and they have a really good runner to do that, the offensive line has to open those holes. That to me is where Marshall gets the edge, because they have to do it both passing and running. Whereas Western Kentucky is predicated so heavily on the pass that they can have a, slightly above average ability to run block. They just don't have to do it as often. So that's an interesting tidbit to who can, if Marshall can get to Bailey Zappi a handful of times, if they can get to their season average in sacks for the year or for the, per game, it's one of those things. But give me Marshall in a slight edge of the offensive line.
I think one takeaway for me for this will be that I think the offensive line and running back play for Marshall could kind of be the tipping point here. And I'm going to look back to our game against FAU. I remember when we previewed FAU, you're like, man, this running back that they have is really good. He's shifty, he can break plays. He's a phenomenal, game-changing, capable running back. And then we held him something like 40 yards. And credit to our defense, just stepping up and playing lights out bananas the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. I really think, like you said, that your offensive line can make a good running back look great or a great running back look elite. I think our defensive side has also shown that we can make a really good running back look average. And I'm not saying we're going to make Ali look average, but I'm saying it might boil down to if we can hold him in check or make you all more one-dimensional, that's going to tip the scales towards our way versus if your offensive line is able to do what they do and provide those running holes, those running lanes, those big plays, chains continuing to move, then I think those scales are going to start to shift towards Marshall, because you're going to be, if you're continuing plays and drives, you're keeping that number one offense off the field. So to me, this kind of offensive line, running back, and even defensive line, pressuring quarterbacks is really kind of be the tipping scales and who pulls away and has the edge here. So I think it's definitely interesting conversation. I think it's going to be strength on strength, like we've said, and obviously it has to be played in the field to see which way it goes.
Well, look, I'm not going to steer too far away from these position group edge because we're getting ready to transition to the defensive side of the ball. But what you're talking about, like I said, it causes me to think of other things and go places that my conversation normally wouldn't have. And by what you were just saying, all that kept popping into my mind was watching Hurd and UAB play, because that seemed to be Bill Clark's game plan. Let's sell out on the run and make Grant Wells make enough throws and make enough plays to beat us. And he wasn't able to do that. Rasheen Ali he wasn't bottled up in that game, but you could tell that UAB's game plan was to stop the run game at all costs and make that quarterback beat us. So it's a recipe that has worked in the past, and that's the recent past, just a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see if Helton and his defensive coaches have a similar game plan. But that being said, let's transition to the defensive side of the ball, and let's talk about the edge at defensive line. Who do you think has it in the Moonshine Throwdown for 2021?
I think both of these teams and units are really strong. Before I give the edge to either way, I think Western Kentucky doesn't have. I mean, obviously we have several guys that are impact players and can make plays, but I think once you go back and you look over a season worth of resume and stats and plays and what they've done, I think Western has been more successful at creating pressure, making people uncomfortable. There are some tackles for loss, there are some sacks, etc. But I think more of our success has been on just creating pressure and not always having a clean pocket, which in turn has led to interceptions and bad plays on the back end, where you don't always see those stats, on these guys that we're talking about here. I think, and I think one of those stats that I saw that Huff tweeted out was, leading the conference in sacks. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But they get to the quarterback. So I think the edge goes to Marshall, but obviously I think the Western side has a really good set of guys, a really good front that, part of this is going to come down to getting that pressure on Grant Wells. We've talked about his quarterback touchdown interception ratio. We're going to have pressure on him to create those bad decisions. So I don't think Western's front has to necessarily compile stats as far as tackles for loss and sacks. I just think they have to create pressure. But I think Marshall does those things better on paper, statistically wise. So I think the edge has to go to them, even though I think both units are really strong and really good at what they do.
Yeah, both defensive lines are really strong. And, like I said, we're talking defensive line here, but we're talking a sacks, and that's a defensive unit, stat. Not all 37 of Marshall's sacks have come from the defensive linemen. Okay, they just haven't. And by the way, Western Kentucky has 27 on the season. We have a lot of common opponents, but there are still a few outliers there that might be able to keep you from getting sacks. If Marshall plays Michigan State, maybe they don't have 37 on the season. You know what I mean? If Marshall plays UTSA and not North Carolina Central or whatever, maybe they don't have 37. I mean, they had, 9 sacks or something crazy like that against Navy. So they got out to a really fast start in the sacks category, but still they get after the quarterback. But defensive linemen, look, we talked about in the preseason that Western Kentucky was returning quite possibly the best defensive line in the conference. They had 3 of the 4 pieces returning from the starting unit, and who would rise to the occasion to be that 4th guy. And while several have played there, the name that pops off of my head the most is Darius Shipp. He's just come on like gangbusters and really filled that void, become that 4th guy to solidify that unit to go along with Malone and Jones and Jeremy Darvin. So the cohesive unit, excellent. I still think Western has the finest set of bookend rushers in the conference in Malone and Jones. It doesn't always have to show up in a sack category. They can be disruptive without ever touching the quarterback. And then when you look at things like opening running lanes, you want guys that are physically built like Jeremy Darvin in the middle. I mean, he's hard to move. He takes up space, and he's a very strong individual. So he can also fight back quite a bit against an offensive lineman and maybe get a little bit of penetration to where a linebacker can creep up right behind him and get a hit in the backfield. Conversely, when you look at Marshall and you talk about guys like Kobe Cumberlander and Owen Porter, Jamari Edwards, all these guys do a phenomenal job of getting to the quarterback. There are others. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but I could sit here and talk for 2 hours naming names on both of these rosters. These guys know who they are. And I love to use that term that the usual suspects. Marshall's got a lot of usual suspects on the defensive line. They really do. But if you have to give an edge, I have to give the edge to Marshall. Just like you said, they're slightly better at getting to the quarterback, and that's something that is going to be so key in this game. So give me the defensive line for the Herd with the edge. Linebackers, Steve, who you got?
I think, again, similar to the defensive line, I think both of these teams have really strong units. I think Western is really deep in this department. We've got a lot of transfer guys that have been here and making plays, but I think week in, week out, it can be a different guy for Western, whether it be Pitts or Ignont or Jock Evans. Just several guys are kind of always in that linebacker category with a lot, tackles or tackles for loss. With Marshall, though, I think they have more, I guess, just top-heavy talent. You see more production coming from there. It's not spread out, where it seems like Western's always kind of spread out on the defensive side. And that's kind of across the board for them with tackles and everything. You don't see a guy with 12, 15, a big number of tackles. It's usually, 7 or 8 or 5 or 6. It's kind of weird when you start coming over and looking at their defensive stats. It's not one person kind of leading that charge. So I'm going to give the edge to Marshall, even though, again, I think both of these units are really strong and really productive. I just think I have to lean Marshall just because they're always super strong on the defensive front side of the ball and that second level with the linebackers.
I too have to give the edge to the Herd for a couple of reasons. Namely, their number 1 and number 2 tacklers on the team are linebackers. So that tells you those guys are always sniffing around the ball. Conversely, you have to get down to the 3rd leading tackler for Western Kentucky before you get to a linebacker, and it's Will Ignont, a rising superstar stud for the Fighting BGK Wires. But he's been a really nice surprise from a guy that was kind of feeling it out last year. And he's come on really, really well. But, you get down to your 3rd leading tackler. Also contributes a little bit in the pass rush game. He's got 3 sacks on the season, but it's Ignont and then Demetrius Kane way down there. It's like the 4th, 5th, 6th maybe leading tackler. Whereas, like I said, Marshall's 2 leading tacklers, Abraham Beauplan and Eli Neal, known entities in Conference USA. You got to game plan these guys. If you don't, they're going to kill you. Beauplan is the one that's most cut this year from that Tavante Beckett, Chase Hancock type cloth, good for 10 tackles a game, good for, 12 tackles a game. Whereas Eli Neal is also good for in that, like you're talking about, 7, 8 tackles a game, but he's getting after the quarterback. He's leading the team in sacks for Marshall, 5.5, which is tied with D'Angelo Malone, by the way. So you can tell that Marshall's linebackers are productive in different ways. But they don't have to exclusively carry the load. They just happen to carry the load from a tackle standpoint. There's also some other guys that will get down there and cause some havoc, mainly Charlie Gray. He does a great job of getting after the quarterback, just being disruptive. And then you toss in dudes like Brian Cavalcante, who can come in and clean it up a little bit. And there's some younger guys that come in and contribute as well when these guys need a breather. But Marshall is deeper at linebacker, and they're just productive in different ways and more effectively. So give me the edge to the Herd in the linebacker department. Defensive backs is one if we had to preview this game 6 weeks ago, I don't know how I would have been talking about this, to be honest with you. But we're not doing it 6 weeks ago. We're doing it now. So let's talk about it. Who's got the edge on Saturday from a defensive back standpoint?
Yeah, like you said, if we were talking about this, after week 5 of the season, we're probably leaning really heavy towards Marshall. But now we're talking about this week 12, and Western Kentucky has just been on an absolute interception and turnover just binge here lately. Every game we're getting 2, 3, 4 interceptions, if not more. And I think I saw a stat somewhere today, I think the WKU recruiting page, about where Western ranks as far as interceptions on the season in conference and even in the nation, just being really high up there. So, maybe it's recency bias, maybe it's red glasses bias, but I just think the WK, and I don't know the exact stats of Marshall. You'll drop them on me. I know you will. But I do know the Western stats and what we've done the last 5 and 6 weeks. So I'm going to lean to the Western side, and it's only because it's more on where they're trending, what they've been doing. What have you done for me lately? These last 5, 6 weeks have just been incredible. And like I said, with the defensive line part, it starts up there. You may not see these interception statistics on the defensive line, but they're getting a lot of the credit for it by applying pressure and making these throws have to be quicker and more precise than they need to be from the quarterback's perspective. If you're rushed getting it out of there, if you're off your spot, if you're moving, whatever it is, those balls get thrown up with not as much accuracy, and cornerbacks can go make plays. And I think that's what we've seen happen. And Western's been really good on that front, even if we're not seeing a lot of tackles for loss and sacks up front. We've seen the fruits of those labors come on the back end with the interception department. So I'm going to lean Western Kentucky. You have to like where they're trending, and they're riding high right now. And I think it could be another one of those kind of deciding factors of the game. If we can apply that pressure, cause some mistakes and some turnovers, it could be a tipping point for this game really quick.
If we were grading who has the edge, just period, and not necessarily against the team they're getting ready to play, I might feel a little bit differently in some data points. But for me, the defensive back edge right now is for Western Kentucky without a doubt. They are red hot in the turnover category. 18 interceptions on the season. The by and large bulk of those have come in the last month. Conversely, Marshall's got 10 interceptions on the season. Now, look, that's the big eye-popping stat that everybody wants to talk about when you talk about defensive back play. It's interceptions. How many balls you coming down with? You can factor in passes defended and all that stuff, and what they don't tell you is PI calls. And Marshall's been prone to get a lot of those here lately. So you've seen a little bit of a trend in a downward fashion for the Herd. They've been getting hit for some big plays, long touchdown passes, or drawing that PI on the big, long downfield play to extend a drive on a 3rd and freaking 20 or something like that. And then when you factor in that Bailey Zappi does a really good job of not throwing that many interceptions, he'll throw one. I mean, he's good for one a game. And it's usually in the first quarter and, when he's trying to get it going. But, you look at the red-hot Western Kentucky defensive backs, and then you look at Grant Wells' penchant to throw 3 or 4 balls up for grabs every game, and that's got to worry you a little bit if you're a Marshall fan. You've got to be salivating if you're a Western Kentucky fan at that prospect, because we're going to have 4 potentially legitimate chances to get an interception in this game, whether if it's just a bad read or a bad throw or a tip ball or what have you, they're going to be there. Can you come down with them? I don't know. And we remember if we said back in the preseason where Western had lost so much on the back end, some all-timers were gone, NFL guys gone. It was basically going to be Antoine Kincaid and who else would rise to the occasion. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, Antoine Kincaid still as advertised. But some of these other guys that have just come on and are sniffing the ball like no other. Beanie Bishop, amazing rise here the past month, not only in the defensive game, but in the return game as well. Had a touchdown called back against Florida Atlantic last week. So that one doesn't show up in the stat line, but it happened. Omari Alexander, another guy that had a multi-interception game just a couple of weeks ago. And then you talk about due to like AJ Brathwaite, who's also having a solid season. So they're 4 deep, solid at corner. And then there's still other guys, corner and safety, and still other guys that are being contributors. And you look on the other side of that, I think Marshall still has the best tandem of safeties going with Najee Johnson and Brandon Drayton. When Brandon Drayton is healthy and in the game, he just adds such a different dynamic to that Herd defense. He allows them to be so much more flexible with what they want to do. So to have Johnson and Drayton both healthy and both in the game is going to be huge. I hope they're both healthy. Najee Johnson had been dinged up a little bit, but it's senior day. He's a senior. You know he doesn't want to miss it. If he can go, he's going to go. Stephen Gilmore is – he's generally as advertised. Every DB gets beat in a game, every one. But by and large, Stephen Gilmore is as close to a lockdown corner as Marshall's going to have or has had since Chris Jackson left. Micah Abraham came out in the pressers this week and was talking about, he gave the candid quote, about Western coming in. We don't like those guys. They don't like us. If you're a fan of this rivalry, that's the kind of shit you want to hear. You want to hear these guys being real. Not like they're a good ball club. They're well coached. We expect them, blah, 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 blah. No, you want to hear that. We don't like them. They don't like us. They're going to get our best game. We're going to get theirs, that kind of stuff. But Micah Abraham is another guy who's come on really strong for Marshall here lately. He's picking up a lot of the slack where these guys have kind of let it drop a little bit. But for right now, trend-wise, like you're saying, I'm with you. My head is where your head's at. It's Western Kentucky because they're trending in a completely different way than they were 6 weeks ago. Let's talk about a little bit of special teams, and then we'll get into some meat and potatoes. We're an hour into this, and I'm loving it. This is great conversation. I wish all of our podcasts could be this way. Who's got the edge at kicker for the Moonshine Throwdown? Your boy.
my boy Legatron. I think both sides of this rivalry have really strong and consistent kickers. I don't know his kicker stats right off the top of my head, obviously, but I think Narvison's only missed 1 kick on the year, consistent and a really strong leg. So I think it's hard for me to lean away from him just because I think he does what he's supposed to do every single game. It could be a push, but I'm going to go Legatron. Just because, he's virtually perfect on the year except for 1 field goal, if I'm not mistaken. So unless you can convince me otherwise with the Marshall doing the same thing, I think Narvison is one of the premier kickers in the conference and really good in the nation. We just don't ask him to kick a lot of field goals. We're usually finishing off the drives, thankfully, with 6. But Narvison's a good asset back there and a solid kicker. So I'm going to lean Western Kentucky and Narvison.
Yeah, it's Braden Narvison all the way. Shane Chucci does a great job for Marshall. He's been a very good calming, stabilizing kicker to that unit. Early in the year, it was a little bit of upheaval. If you remember, he didn't start the season as the number 1 kicker. And then some things went awry, and in comes Chucci and kind of calms that down a little bit. Here lately, a little bit of inconsistency. Missed a field goal last week, and then he was actually iced, so the miss didn't count. Comes back out to attempt it again and misses again. So, it wasn't like a 50-yard type deal. These are hittable kicks. Look, I'm not a kicker. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I'm sure it's hard as hell. But Braden Narvison is just basically the epitome of consistency. So if this comes down to, a field goal shootout, I like Braden Narvison's chances more so than Shane Chucci in this game. But no knock on him. It's just Narvison's that damn good. Punter, who do you got as your edge in the punt game?
It's pretty telling when Trace doesn't even know who our punter is. He's I think he's averaging the most yards per kick in the nation. But on the flip side of that is he kicks, on average, I think 2 times a game. And I think a lot of those national awards, you have to kick 2.5 times per game to be in the conversation. I think you have to have, 30 kicks or whatever it is to have that average. And I don't know that he has 30 punts on the year. But when he does kick the ball, and I know Marshall's punter is really good as well. But I just think, again, when you have a guy that's leading the nation in punting average, even though it's not a lot of punts, I don't think you should be discredited for that. Because when he does punt the ball, he's going to flip the field on you. So again, it could be a push, but I'm going to give the slight edge with a little red bias to John Haggerty.
Again, no slight to Robert Lefevre. He's been a very, very good punter for Marshall for a number of years. And we've heard Trace talk about Robert Lefevre in a positive light for a long time. He is a Robert Lefevre fan for sure. But when you are fielding a first-team all-conference punter, a legitimate NFL prospect, you got the edge. John Haggerty, Trey said, I don't even know who Western's punter is. And as soon as I said, really? It's John Haggerty, he was like, oh, yeah, that's right. So he knew, but he's a Lefevre fan. Just like you're a Narveson fan, it doesn't matter if who he's going up against. You're going to pick your guy. But for me, I get to be down the middle with it and give you my true feelings. And Western Kentucky's got the edge at punter. John Haggerty he's just got the more powerful leg. He has more consistency. I can't really recall him shanking one, giving you the 15-yard punt. I can't remember that. If it has happened, it's been quite a while ago. So edge Western Kentucky in the punt game and John Haggerty. Look, let's go overall here in the return game. We're talking about kick returns, punt returns, and kick and punt coverage. Who's got the edge?
Western Kentucky is like you alluded to earlier with Beanie Bishop, and Jared Stearns is back there returning kicks as well. D'Angelo Wilson, Jamal Carruthers, several guys, but Beanie Bishop has kind of been that guy lately, averaging 20-plus yards per kick return, and did have the one called back against FAU, which he was coming straight towards us in the 10th. Could not believe that, and I think it was a late flag. At least when I saw
away from the play, it was away from the play.
It was away from the play. Didn't affect the actual return at all. I'm glad you saw and confirmed it, because when I saw him coming towards me, and then I see a flag go flying behind him, I was like, "Wait, that did not affect this return at all." You picked that up because it was a beautiful return that he broke open. But yeah, his average return has been really good. I couldn't tell you the exact stat, but I know every week when we talk about him, the special teams is always just so consistent. It's hard to nitpick at them. And I don't know the Marshall side. I don't know what their stats are, but Western is just really consistent. Now, punt return side, we don't usually see a lot there. But kick return wise, Beanie Bishop has just been solid. I want to give them the edge, but it could be a push because I don't know the Marshall side of things. You can clarify that for me.
Yeah, I can clarify that for you right now. It's not a push. Marshall has the edge. Jaden Harrison has been a unbelievable bright spot. The Vanderbilt transfer is coming in, and he took one to the house to start the game against FAU, if you remember. Hushed that crowd real quick. Also, Marshall has returned punts for touchdown this year. Their kick averages have been really, really great. There, so many kick returns have come out to close to midfield. It's a real weapon for the herd. Whereas, Western has the ability to do these things. Marshall's actually doing them. So they have the ability as well. That's where it comes to a little bit of a head for me. And it goes away from being a push. One team's talking about the ability to make it happen, and the other team's actually making it happen. And then the return, like defensive-wise, the kick coverage and punt coverage, punt coverage is usually pretty solid for Western Kentucky because of the quality of punting that Haggerty provides. Generally, he can put the ball where he wants it. He can put it high up in the air to eliminate any chance of a good return. But then again, Marshall has the ability and has done it. If Talik Keaton's back there and he's returning punts, he can take him to the house. He's done it. Willie Johnson has done it. Willie had a big return out to midfield. What game was that? Was that maybe that was Old Dominion? I don't remember what game that was, but it was right. It led to a touchdown right before halftime. And if he doesn't return that punt out to midfield, they don't have enough time to get it done. But Marshall's edge in the return game all the way around. It may not be a huge one, but it is an edge. This is the most intriguing one to me of all the positions we've talked about, and we've broken the game down. Here's where it gets fun for me. I want to talk about the coaches. Which head coach? Who's got the edge at the head coach in this game?
Just head coach, not all the coaches?
Well, I mean, you can talk about all of them if you want to.
Okay. All right.
I don't know every single coach on both rosters.
Well, I would just talk about kind of the main three. I would just head coach, OC, DC. Obviously, head coach wise, I think Helton has more experience. Huff coming in his first year has got to experience some adversity, but mostly been successful. Then as you start to comb down into offensive coordinator, I mean, you've got Zach Kitley, who took an offense that was averaging 19 points per game last year and is averaging over 40 this year. Should have been on that Boreals Award finalist list. How he wasn't is just mind-blowing to me, with what he's done and how hot a name he will be. Probably is right now, probably is taking phone calls, has people inquiring about his services. But even if not, he's kind of in that Clayton White mode of it's not if, but when will he get attracted somewhere else. And then on the defensive coordinator side for Western, the job Maurice Crum has done from weeks 1 to 5 to 6 through 11 has just been night and day. I will lean to the Western side only because I think it kind of is like the secondary for me. I think offensively we've been just consistent, steady as can be. I think defensively we've come around and just on all three phases, all three levels of the defense have just been on the upswing as far as schematically and seeing results as far as points per game, where we're at now versus where we would have been at in week 6, 5 or 6 is night and day. So I'm going to give the edge to the Hilltoppers, and it's not by a wide margin by any means. I just will have more faith on game day in our preparation and where we put our players in the best position to succeed.
There have been a lot of coaches on the Marshall sideline that have been in big Conference USA games, right? A lot of coaches were at Florida Atlantic for a good amount of time when Lane Kiffin was there and they were going to conference title games. So they know this conference well. Charles Huff has been in the biggest games that college football has to offer. He's coached in a Rose Bowl. He's coached in a national championship game. He's been to the college football playoff several times. So here's the deal for me. We're not talking about the college football playoff. We're talking about this rivalry game. And yeah, you might say, well, so what? It's a Conference USA regular season game. No, it's not. It's the Moonshine Throwdown. It's a different animal. Okay. No, it's not a national championship game. No, it's not the college football playoff, but it's our own animal, right? And Tyson Helton was on that sideline in 2019 when he got depending on which Hilltoppers you talk to, he got jobbed because he tried to ice the kicker twice, and both times Rowasser got a practice kickoff, and he was infuriated by that. Some people might say that's delay a game. Some people might say it shouldn't have been allowed, but it was allowed. So you don't think that he remembers what happened in 2019? He won't talk about it. That is bugging him, and now he gets an opportunity, on this field again with a superior team at certain position groups to be able to put one on this team. Charles Huff hasn't been in the Moonshine Throwdown yet. He hasn't, it might not be as big of a moment or, too big of a moment to get to him, which is fine. But Tyson Helton has been here, and he knows what this game means to his players. He knows what this game means, period. And he was, I'm sure, felt cheated out of a win or a potential win in 2019. So if any part of you thinks that he doesn't want to come out and put 70 on this Marshall team, you're fooling yourself. He's going to want to put this so out of reach that you can't have an opportunity to come down to a last-second field goal to win the game, right? So for those reasons alone, give me the coaching staff, for Tyson Helton particularly, with the edge. Marshall's got to find bevy of coaches, fine bevy of coaches. Charles Huff might be the next superstar in the making, but he's a handful of games into his first year as a head coach. Still figuring it out, still doing things, still trying to, just figure it all out the way he wants it done. Helton has had several years under his belt, and we know that whenever something goes wrong, he fixes it quickly. And it's 3 years worth of building to get to this point. Again, we're back to that word culmination. So this is the culmination for not just these teams and these programs, but this head coach as well. He's culminated in an opportunity to get to a Conference USA title game, period. Bowl game's already in the bag, huge offense already in the bag, looking for a championship right now. So the culmination is there for Tyson Helton and his team. Give me the edge to the Western Kentucky coaching staff. Now that we have broken down everybody that's going to be playing in this game or calling to play in this game, let me ask you where you think, particularly, the game can be won or lost for Western Kentucky.
I think it's going to be won on the defensive side. Where we've kind of seen them trending what they've been doing well, and we've talked about it through these position, matchups. I mentioned it earlier that I think that front pressure that Western's going to apply is going to really, if they can make Wells uncomfortable, and particularly if Western can jump out to an early lead and make kind of Marshall more one-dimensional, where they can't just, lean on the run game or the pass game. If they do what they did to FAU and they jump out 21-3, and Wells has to drop back and pass every down, then that's when Western, that's what they've been doing the last 5 or 6 weeks. When they were on their 1-4 skid, we were behind every game, 14 points in the first quarter, and tried to come back and make it a game. We've jumped out on people early in the recent weeks, maybe not as fast a start as I always want, but FAU 21-3 first quarter, hard to complain about. And when we do that, the defense can pin their ears back, go after the quarterback with a lot more intensity. And again, you might not see those stats up front, but we have definitely seen those stats on the back end, and creating turnovers and getting the ball back for your offense. That's going to be very efficient, very high octane. So I think the defensive pressure and the ability to either create mistakes, create turnovers, or just period get off the field is going to be where the game is won or lost. If Western continues to be on this just trajectory that they're on with pressure and turnovers, it could be a landslide. It could get ugly real quick. But if that pressure is not there, if Marshall's allowed to have a balanced offense running and passing the ball, then we could easily be in a slugfest shootout that we've seen in past years. So I really think that defensive pressure and the ability to create turnovers is going to be the swing point here. If Western can make Marshall one-dimensional, jump out to an early lead, that's only going to swing that pendulum further into Western's favor, because that's what they're going to want to do. They're going to want to start fast, get a lead, create pressure, create turnovers, and obviously widen that lead and coast to a victory. That's what they want to do. Will that happen? I don't know, but I think it's going to be predicated on the defensive pressure and the secondary making plays like they've been doing the last 5 or 6 weeks.
I mean, that's an excellent recipe, right? Western Kentucky does a fabulous job of making the opposition press and get out of what they want to do, because far too many opponents of these Hilltoppers fall behind, and then they think, shit, we've got to make the scoreboard match. Or we're going to get blown out. And all that does is generally lead to a blowout, because you get too concerned with, oh, they're at 21, we got to get to 21 before this gets out of hand, instead of just doing what you do and see if what you do at the end of the game is enough to get a win. Of course, things go out the window a little bit when you look up and it's like midway through the fourth and you're down by 14 points. You're going to have to change it up a little bit. But you can't fall behind 21-10 and just like bail on your offense because it's, 13 minutes left in the second quarter and Western's got 3 touchdowns on the board and you've only got 10 points. You can't bail on what you want to do. You're going to have to ask your defense to step it up a little bit and get some stops so that your offense can continue to try to make plays in the way that you like to make them. Look, here's where the game is won and lost in a very microcosmic factor. I'm trying to narrow it down to like a one little tidbit stat line. If Marshall cannot get a sack on Bailey Zappi, if they come out of this game with 0 sacks, I don't think Marshall wins the game. I don't know what the magic number is that will say that they do win, but I'm just saying if they cannot get to him, I don't think they win. That to me is where the game will be lost for Marshall, is if they get 0 sacks. I mean, hell, they could get 10 and still lose. I'm just saying if they can't get to him at all, I don't think they'll win the game. Where the game loses for Western Kentucky is, obviously, if you can't keep Rasheen Ali from getting 5 yards a carry, why the hell would Grant Wells ever have to throw the ball? Ever. If these coaches are willing to earn their money in the most boring fashion ever, earn it. Take the 5 yards a carry, move the chains every second down, and be done with it. Shorten the game. Continue to go down the field and get touchdowns, whatever. It's not a tough ask, but it's hard. No, there have been teams that have shut down really. Rasheen Ali, hell, Navy, he had like 50 yards rushing, but 4 touchdowns. I mean, it happens, but Rasheen Ali's not the same back in week 12 as he was in week 1, just like Western's defense isn't the same now that they were 2 months ago. But those little 2 points to me is where I think, like, all right, if this is what we see in the stat line at the end of the game, Western loses or Marshall loses. So particularly, let's get to the more what's the word I don't know what the word I'm looking for. What folks are used to hearing when they listen to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. What are your points to victory for the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers?
One thing I just alluded to was they need to start fast again. They need to not fall behind and play from behind. They need to jump out ahead in the road atmosphere environment that they're going to be in. They need to jump out, start fast. Then they need to, again, like you've highlighted Rasheen Ali, that is going to be a strength for the offensive line and their offense. I think they need to limit Ali to under 100 yards. And a lot of that's going to be, can they make Marshall more one-dimensional? Start fast, make them lean on the pass a little bit more. And then the third thing is going to be they need to create turnovers. Just continue doing what they've been doing, applying pressure. If they start fast, if they hold Ali under 100 yards, all these things kind of go hand in hand. And then they're applying pressure and creating turnovers on Grant Wells, who has shown that knack for throwing those balls up for grabs. Then I think all those things could lead and should lead to Hilltopper victory. So I would definitely say those 3 things just absolutely have to happen. Western has shown that they can afford some turnovers on their end just because their offense is so efficient generally. Even when they're not turning the ball over, they're generally going to score. And they've been getting the ball back. And if not having a push in turnovers, they've been on the plus side of turnovers lately. So definitely starting fast, holding Ali under 100 yards, and then creating some turnovers. Just kind of doing what they've been doing lately, but it's going to have to be at a really high level and really intent on, really starting fast this game. I think that's going to be a key, is jumping out early in this game and not letting it be a slugfest dogfight, for all 4 quarters.
I think that my number one key to victory for Western Kentucky is just what I'm going to call capitalize on opportunities. I mentioned earlier in the show that Grant Wells is probably going to throw you 3 or 4 opportunities to get a turnover. Will you get them, or will they fall and, safely to the ground and just be an incomplete pass? Also, capitalizing on opportunities is going to be converting that 3rd and 2, extending a drive, capitalizing on an opportunity when it's 1st and goal and not having to settle for a field goal. all these things are going to happen. Every time you have an opportunity, can you capitalize on it? Or will more often than not, you go, damn, that one got away from us. Number two, the tackling is going to have to be sound and to a certain degree swarming, because Ali is not a guy that goes down on the first hit. We know that. Corey Gamage is a monster of a man to try to break down. And he's got this knack to where he wants to try to make a few shifty moves and get around you. So the first guy's going to have to really slow him up. And then the second and third guy's going to have to do the damage and get him down. That's where the swarming comes in. Number three, of course, you can't have turnovers. I mean, Zappy's kind of do, but like I said earlier, I don't know that it's in his DNA to do that. He's just got such a command of this offense. He just knows all the nuances. He processes information so quickly. He knows where the read's going to be at a glance. Like, that guy's not open, but this dude's going to be open in half a second. So, you go down to that third read, and it's just like he could do this in his sleep. So keeping the turnover margin at least even is key. Number four, I think you're going to have to silence the noise, because Marshall is putting together a concerted effort to try to fill Jones C. Edwards Stadium. We've all seen it. They've got promotions going on. They offered free tickets to every youth sports team in the area. Every player on that team gets a free ticket. Parents and relatives can get discounted tickets. Like, they're trying to fill the stadium. They're trying to make some noise for the guys in Kelly green and white and make it a little bit more difficult for you Hilltoppers to come in and silence the crowd. So just got to block out the noise. I don't have any inkling at all that Western's not going to come in here and put up a minimum of 35 points. Minimum. I mean, they're averaging 40 some, but a minimum of 35 points just feels easily doable, unless the wheels blow off. If the wheels blow off, all right. We've seen Marshall have a 6 turnover game and against Middle Tennessee, and then we come in and see Middle Tennessee have a 6 or 7 turnover game against Western. So when the hell is it Western's turn to have a 7 turnover game? You better hope it's not in this one. But
not today.
Well, so I think we're in for a good one no matter what. But those keys to victory for me are I believe, what have to happen for Western to secure a win. Who's going to be your 200 proof player this week?
Well, it's going to be Bailey Zappi. The guy that we've kind of touched upon a lot this season from the quarterback breakdown at the beginning of the season, through games 1 through 11 so far. He's just proven himself to be that consistent, automatic kind of guy that's going to give you 4 or 5 touchdowns, maybe that 1 interception. He's going to give you 400 plus yards. Just total command of the offense. We've talked about him knowing the system. Sometimes we don't talk about those intangibles of knowing where those free plays, those hard cadence, changing the snap count and getting those free plays and just taking that shot down the field. We talked earlier about Marshall kind of giving up a lot of pass interference plays. Don't think that in studying tape that, they've not seen those big down the field shots that they can take a chance on and even can zero in on certain people's tendencies to not turn their head, to use a Trace hated point there. If they're not going to turn their head, we've got several guys that'll blow by them and can put them in position to either have a 50-50 ball or create those turnovers. And I think Zappi is he's really good at what he does in this system. And to call him a system quarterback is not a slight in any way, because I think every quarterback's goal and every system's goal is to have a system quarterback. You want them to know your system. So I think it's going to rest on the shoulders of Zappi. He's going to come out and have a good game. He's definitely my 200 proof player of the game.
I believe the term you were talking about with Trace is one of my favorites. And, we all have our our isms, the things that we say. And this is when you talk about the defensive backs and Trace getting fired up with them not turning their head. The term he uses is face guard and pray, and and I love that. I think that is a great. That's just a great way to describe things. It just sucks that it's usually about Marshall's secondary, but yeah, I love the face guard and pray approach to defense. My 200 proof player this week is, of course, Bailey Zappi. This is the opportunity to put one of the cherries on the top of the sundae, right? The conference championship game berth, the rivalry game win. But let me give you a little bit of a wrinkle here. We've talked, I don't know how many times so far, about his approaching these all-time records, right? And you even tweeted out earlier in the day that he was getting dangerously close to Brandon Doty's single-season passing yards record, which is 5,055, by the way. Bailey Zappi sets at 4,640 yards, which means he needs 415 yards in this game to tie that record, 416 yards to break that record. If he gets another yard and gets 417 in this game, you might also notice that I've been tweeting out records for the Moonshine Throwdown. If he gets 417 yards, he's going to tie Rakeem Cato for the second most yards in a Moonshine Throwdown game. Brandon Doty, of course, owns the record with 491. Cato and Doty in the epic 2014 matchup set those two records. But if Zappi can get 417 yards, he'll tie Cato for second all-time in a single game Moonshine Throwdown for passing and set a new Western Kentucky single-season passing yards record. So how's that for a nice number to zero in on? 416 would be the magic number. 417 would tie, and 418 would put him in second place all by himself. I don't think there's a 500-yard day on the game, coming up, but you never know. I mean, he's fully capable. So, yeah, give me Bailey Zappi as well. Steve, score prediction time. What do you got for the Tops?
Yeah, and I've been running this one down, and we know how close I've come the last couple weeks. I've been this
right on
close. I'm going to hit one of these weeks, but in my head, this game can go a number of different ways, but all the different ways that I see it all point the red way. I don't see Marshall outgunning this Western Kentucky offense, especially with the way the defense is playing. Not saying it can't happen. I just don't see it happening how and where we're playing today. The recent struggles that we saw with MTSU and with ODU by Marshall, I just think Western's clicking at such a high pace that this game could get really ugly. I don't think it'll be 60-6 ugly by any means. But I'm pitching around anywhere from comfortable wins to close wins that are still not very threatened. But the number that I pinned myself on, I pinned myself with a 45-31 victory for Western Kentucky, a 14-point margin. Over the over with 76 total points. I think the over under 72.5. But I was still even iffy on the 31 for Marshall. I think they can and certainly could get there. But the way Western's defense has been playing lately is closer to like 18 to 19, 20 points. But I think this Marshall offense is better than the recent offenses that we've seen Western having to play against. So that's why I kind of hedged my score prediction a little bit heavier for the Marshall offense, knowing what they are capable of doing, but still giving Western a pretty comfortable lead. And this would be a really good game to kind of have their most efficient game. FAU was pretty good, but there were some turnovers still. This would be a really good game to kind of really tie up those loose ends and have a really even higher efficient game than what we've seen, and hopefully cruise to a comfortable victory in this rivalry game. So 45-31, give me the Tops in a victory.
45-31. Okay. It's jotted down. We'll see where it lands, how close you are. Pretty intriguing. I will tell you, I'm curious to see where Trace is at with it, to be honest with you. I don't know. He's not exuding confidence. He feels good about Marshall's chances, but I don't think he's overly confident that this is just going to be a slam dunk herd win. I think, we talk about a number of games throughout our doing this podcast to where we look at scenarios and we go, well, look, this is either going to be a close Marshall win, a close Western win, or a blowout Western win, but it probably won't be a blowout Marshall win. And I think that's one of these type scenarios. 3 of the 4, there's not much about it unless, like I said, the wheels come off. Marshall gets a few defensive scores, pick sixes, fumble recoveries, or, and scooping scores or kick returns for touchdown that really make this game lopsided. Marshall's going to need those kind of things. But if you're just going on a straight offensive shootout, I think Western's got their number here. So I'm interested to see how it all plays out. So you're taking Western Kentucky on the outright win. To hell with giving me a 1.5. You're pounding the over. He's all in it, straight across the board. He's taking it, the 3-for-3 pick. So anyway, interesting. Look, we were going to make this a 2-part episode. We're an hour and a half into this already, so there's no way. This is going to be a special 2-part Moonshine Throwdown preview. You're going to have your opportunity to listen exclusively to Stephen and I cover a more Western Kentucky-centric version, and then we'll have Trace and I covering a more Marshall-centric version. Steve, so on that note, let's do some final thoughts, and then we'll get the hell out of here.
Yeah, I mean, just, this game and the series and the rivalry this year is just really shaped up perfectly in just so many different ways. Both the teams have seen adversity. Both of them are very, very strong contenders. Like you said, this isn't just a rivalry game. This is kind of a de facto East Championship playoff game. Just like last week, UTSA UAB had a de facto West Championship game. It's kind of just turned into a little mini playoff that will lead up to UTSA's field on December 3rd. So, yeah, it should be a really solid game. I'm excited for the trip. Obviously, those plans have been made for weeks as far as hoping to be able to get up there. All the stars have aligned. We will be heading out Friday afternoon and be up there Friday evening. Hopping around the town wherever the wind blows, probably at Union. We've talked about that. I'll probably be Union heavy that night unless the wind blows somewhere else. We decide to go somewhere else, but just hoping to meet a lot of people. Some people that we saw when I was there earlier this year, and then also get to shake hands and kiss babies with some new faces and people that I didn't get to see last time. So just looking forward to just an overall fun environment in a game. It's always welcoming anytime I've ever been in Huntington, West Virginia, even though it's rivalry week. I've still got people DMing me with suggestions of where to go and when to go and, come by and see us. So always feel welcomed. We'll be as friendly and as cordial as possible up until that 2:30 kickoff time, and then the gloves will come off, and we'll see what happens between the whistles for those the street fight between the whistles for those 60 minutes, and then the game will wrap up, and who knows, maybe we'll meet up for another drink or two before we head our separate ways back to Bowling Green or there in West Virginia. So I'm looking forward to it, man. The overall atmosphere is just going to be unbelievable. It's going to be fun, and I hope Western Kentucky brings a good number of people. I have heard a decent number of people on Twitter talk about coming, but I hope they do travel well. They generally do travel pretty well, but this late in the season, it's kind of a toss-up, this cold weather. Even a home game would be a toss-up at this point. So I do hope they come just because the stakes are there, and the rivalry is a known thing and is always fun. So I hope we do show out and bring a little red. But even if not, if I'm the only one there wearing red, hey, get ready because the band ain't safe.
If you're in the Marching Thunder, you better be wary of the guy in red. Look, let me help you out a little bit. It's a 3:30 kick. You're losing an hour coming to West Virginia, so don't forget that. Don't sleep through the game. I know you already be on the West Lot tailgating your ass off, so you're not going to miss much. But 3:30. Actually, I don't even know if I said that at the beginning of the episode. Saturday, 3:30 p.m. on CBS Sports Network. If you, for some reason, decide to stay at home, it's going to be chilly. Dress warm. The liquid warmth doesn't always do the trick, so wear some warm clothes. Steve packed plenty of Pedialyte so that you can recover fully from Friday night into Saturday and do it all again. It's going to be a great time. I mean, it just is. So everybody that's going to be there, have one for me. You know, I envy you all. So this will be a great one. A lot on the line, a lot at stake. Y'all take care of Steve. Make sure he wants to come back again. But we're looking for a great one. Another added to the library of instant classic Moonshine Throwdown games. I don't know. You know, there have been things swirling around like Marshall might try to get out of the Conference USA in 2022. So I don't know that will happen. Who knows if that will happen? But look, we might be looking at the last potential conference matchup of the Moonshine Throwdown. We could be. Now, next year in Bowling Green could be the last one, but this year could be the last one. And we could be hoping for, a continuation of the series from a non-conference standpoint until more dominoes fall, and hopefully Western and Marshall land in the same conference again. So don't take this one for granted and say, I'll just go next year. If you're in Bowling Green, you might want to travel for this one. Might be the last one. Last point I'm going to make is Marshall's on a 4-game winning streak against Western Kentucky. I know I don't have to remind you of that, but that goes both ways. There are a number of players on these rosters, A, that have never either beaten Marshall, or B, have never lost to Western Kentucky. And if you don't think the senior class or whoever it is for Marshall doesn't want to graduate or leave never having lost to Western Kentucky, you're fooling yourself. That's a little bit of added motivation on top of we want to get to a conference championship game and we just want to beat Western Kentucky, period. They want to be able to graduate and say, we never lost to those guys. They never beat us. Conversely, the Western seniors will be like, you know what? They got us 4 straight years, but by my senior year, we clipped those dudes. And we clipped them on the way to a conference title game. And I don't care what you say. An 11-0 UTSA, potentially about to be 12-0 against North Texas, they better be scared of whoever the East is bringing to San Antonio. I don't care if there's 60,000 people in the Alamo Dome. That's just going to be a bunch of heartbroken Roadrunners. The East is going to rule the roost yet again in the Conference USA Championship. So just get used to it. You heard it here, not first, but you're definitely not going to hear it last. We'll keep banging that drum. I don't think, Steve, back me up on this. I don't think any Roadrunner wants to see Western Kentucky again. What do you think?
No, absolutely. I mean, definitely that opinion I've seen on Twitter. And they're not loudly vocal about it, but they're just kind of like, God, I hope we don't see those guys again.
Well, now, I mean, why would you want to? You're going to bring dudes from Texas back to Texas, so there will be a larger than normal contingency. But I just don't think they want them again.
I'm sure they think they can win the game, and I'm sure they think they will win the game. But I think realistically, they have to look at that first matchup and say, we played the perfect and best game of our season and barely won. And now our team, Western, if we win this week, we're trending in such a high direction offensively and now defensively that's a different team than what you faced in their first conference game of the season.
Yeah.
Offensively, pretty much the same. Defensively, whole different animal. And I don't think you're going to rattle them even, in the Alamo Dome. I think, they don't want to see them again. I don't think they. I don't think they want to see either one of these teams.
I don't either.
I think they're taking their first L on December 3rd. I made sure I took off for that day so I could be home focused on watching the Hilltoppers win. But I think it's going to be fun no matter who is playing in that game. It's going to be a good game. Yeah,
we're not trying to do a Conference USA championship game preview here right now, but let's not forget UTSA quarterback Frank Harris had a career day. He'd never had a game close to that. And oh, by the way, the game ended on a miraculously athletic interception going into the end zone by Bailey Zappi. So that game was there.
After a bullshit chop block call, let's not forget that.
That game was still there for the taking. So if they play again, I'm not sure that outcome is the same. So anyway, everybody have a great time this weekend. Be good or be good at it. Stay out of jail. Stay warm. Let's just pull for an epic game. Until next week, we're getting out of here. Steve, take us out.
Go Tops.
Go Herds. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Get ready. It's Moonshine Throwdown week. Later.